Welcome to our podcast. I'm Ryan,
My name is Jackie,
Matthew.
and we are the TOK
TOK
Trio.
Trio.
and joined with us here today is Emilio. Emilio is a sophomore at Southridge, and he'll be listening to us talk about the TOK class, and we'll ask him some questions on what he thinks later on. So let's get started. Um, First, let's just give a recap of, for those who don't know what TOK is, what do you guys kind of think about the class? Like, what is the content that is taught?
Okay, so I guess I could start. TOK, it stands for Theory of Knowledge, for those who don't know, and it is definitely, in my opinion, one of the most interesting classes offered here at Southridge. So first off, it is usually a 2-year course, but you can always just take the first year, the first semester, try it out, see how you like it. And from my experience, TOK has honestly taught me more than I thought it would. So I remember walking into class first semester and meeting Mr. Griffin, and uh, he made me he made me a different man that I am today with the TOK knowledge that he's provided me. So Matthew, what's your experience with TOK? You say?
Yeah, really have a very similar experience. It really something that's really interesting about TOK is it just applies to almost every different class offered at Southridge. Like I've seen connections in math, psychology, and even in my history classes, and it just really allows you to create like a new perspective on like all the knowledge you've gained.
Yeah, for me, I think that it's really helped me realize how I learn things and how, like, I guess our society in general creates knowledge and like what we value in our lives. And I think it's helped me be more reflective on my education and on just like who I am as a person in general. And so, what do you guys think are, or like have been, some of the topics that we've covered that are most interesting to you?
Um, Me personally, I liked a lot of the kind of writing elements that we did last year. So one of my favorite, I guess, overall project was the exhibition that we did towards the end of the year. And I thought the concept and the idea of that project was really interesting because you picked different objects that aren't necessarily like meaningful to your life, and you kind of wrote about it through a TOK lens. And since it was done at towards the end of the semester, you really see how much you develop as a TOK person now. And it really just influences you to think kind of differently than everyone else.
What about you, Matthew?
Personally, I always liked last year when we learned about all the fallacies and like logical fallacies. Like that was really interesting to me, and it really just showed me how, um, like there's like different perspectives on on,
Yeah.
on, on information and just like kind of how people will justify their beliefs no matter what. And it really called me to take a look at my own beliefs and kind of just see like if there's really like evidence or like if it's just like how I was raised or like. And then we also talked about epistemic bubbles and echo chambers, and I thought that was interesting too. Just like some people are unwilling to learn or they just haven't had any other like outside perspective. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that is probably what was most interesting for me too. It's just like, I know in year one we had a lot of opportunities for like, not really debates, but just more like open discussions on some controversial topics that a lot of people might have different opinions about. And I think it was really helpful learning about all that stuff to realize that like just because someone has a different opinion doesn't really mean they're like inherently evil or they have malintent. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to I mean, I would have to agree, not disagree. I feel like discussion is really a big part of TOK, especially in TOK one, because everyone has their different perspectives, and just having a discussion with your table group or even better, people you don't really know, is honestly like a great way to learn in TOK as well. Because that class, it's honestly a lot more about teamwork and working together than listening to the teacher, and on like having these ideas from different people kind of like shapes TOK and like some of the ideas behind it. So
So, Emilio, as a sophomore going into your junior year in a couple of months here, um, based on our description of TOK, what do you think? What are you thinking of this class so far? Basically, like, you interested in taking it, or sounds interesting?
Well, I've heard it like connects with psychology, which I am taking right now, and I do enjoy that. So I think I'm gonna give it a try next year
Mm,
for junior year.
yeah,
Um, yeah, what you guys have said about like discussions, I think that's like something I would enjoy a lot more than
yeah,
writing and packets and stuff. It's something different.
yeah. I think a key feature of this class is that it's not very like workload heavy, which a lot of students probably like, but it's more about being engaged in the class time so that you really get everything out of it, you know. Yeah. Any other thoughts about the class in general?
Kind of just like one more thing. It really just teaches you to be very critical of the information you're consuming. And yeah, I mean, just I would say I'm very. I'd see it. Say I see like a lot more like different views on things now, or like I can see things from kind of both sides, and kind of with the like discussions that we do. You know, like we'll like argue for one side and then like we'll have to flip and argue for the other side, so it's really
Hmm.
interesting to see how there's like really like two views to everything and there's both positives and negatives for both.
Yeah. So after taking the class for a year and one semester now, how do you guys think you've seen some of the TOK ideas show up in your other classes?
um to be honest, I think the most prominent class that I feel like I see TOK a lot is my French class as well as my psychology class, because in French we kind of base the curriculum off of like the IB guidelines and the different experiences. So I feel like when you apply TOK to that class, you think more in like a worldwide way, since it's like another language class. You kind of think about like being in the French culture instead of just learning about it. And like in psychology, for instance, well, I feel like Matthew could elaborate more on psychology. So,
Yeah, I mean, kind of to piggyback off of what you were saying, like in the sociocultural unit, it really just allows you to see multiple perspectives across the entire globe and kind of how no two cultures are the same. And really, yeah, so just like across cultures, like knowledge is produced differently and like what values you hold true really just depends on how you're raised and the environment you grew up in.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in my classes, I've seen how each class kind of views and has different values. Um, like for example, I would say my math and my biology classes are more grounded in like reasoning and um, really place importance on evidence as to a way of knowing and like creating knowledge. But classes like my band class or English, for example, are more, I would say they're more like subjective, and it's definitely a very different way of learning. And I think taking TOK has helped me realize that and help me kind of switch gears for each class easier to not try to just apply one learning style for each class, which I think has been really helpful in succeeding academically.
I think that's a great segue into the two areas of knowledge we want to discuss, which are arts and science. Because as we know, art can be very subjective and there's no right or wrong answer, whereas in science, there's one very concrete answer and it's based off of evidence and reasoning. So, what do you guys think about that?
I mean, personally, when it comes to art, I feel like TOK allows you to be like almost more inclusive to different pieces of art. Because I remember taking a field trip to the Portland Art Museum with my French class and the art class, and that truly just opened my eyes to how many possible, I guess, just how art is like varied throughout different cultures and different countries. And there was one painting that stuck that kind of just like is stuck in my head. It was from this I think it was a Chilean artist, and his way of expressing art was nothing like I've seen before. And I think taking TOK allowed me to like be more open towards that art piece instead of thinking that like, oh, this one is so different, it sucks. I kind of like approached it with like an open view, and I feel like TOK just allowed me to kind of have like just an open view towards everything.
Well, I think for me in art, it's the same way. Um, I feel like usually I like to put very definitive um, labels on things, I guess, when it comes to art, and I like to have like a guideline of what I would define as like good art or like bad art. But TOK has kind of made me think in a different way where um, each art piece is different and has its own knowledge that is created, and that knowledge that it creates gives it value, even if I don't think like the actual piece is very interesting. I think what is created from that is more important.
Yeah, and then something that's really interesting about art is that different people can create different pieces of knowledge from that art piece. Like the artist may have a certain intent for it, but its audience may receive it in a different way. And then also, yeah, like with just the differing perspectives, like just I think I turned it up. I hit a button.
So, bro, just keep talking.
Okay. Um, yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
What?
On art.
Oh, like how you can use it. Yeah, I'm definitely way like not just like paintings art. I guess you could also take music and cultures too, like beyond like the high notes and low notes. You can like look through the lyrics and like their background too as an artist and like see where they're coming from.
It truly just broadens your vision towards so many different, I guess, like art. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about um, what shapes our values.
I think the most obvious example of what shapes my values is obviously how you're raised, So, like, I feel like my parents and family had a very big impact on kind of the values I have today. Not only with my religion, but kind of just the way, like, my work ethic. I would say I got that from my parents. And then also just being a part of the culture here at Southridge, I would say that's very much shaped my perspective as well. Kind of so I went to a private middle school, and so obviously like it was a much more closed off culture. Um, I mean, it's kind of everyone you'd expect, not too much racial diversity or anything. And then so coming to Southridge from a private school, kind of just like really opened my eyes to just everyone else and like realizing that not everyone is like the same cookie cutter personality. So I'd say gotten a lot from coming to Southridge.
Mm, yeah, I mean, I guess I could speak on like my cultural background. I moved to the U.S. when I was in fifth grade, so I feel like my experience before then shaped my values, but as well as the events that happened after I moved here, sort of it added on to my value, but it also made me rethink some of my values from before I moved here. So one of the biggest example is I guess just education. So American schools is I guess very different from the way schooling is taught back in China, and I feel like learning in an environment that is more I guess inclusive, and as well as kind of letting the students choose what their interest is and what they want to learn. I feel like it's pretty different from China because back there you kind of just study all the time and it's the same subjects and you just want to get the highest score on the test. But here it's like having all the different options, all your electives, and yeah, I mean, I feel like that kind of influenced my values a lot. And yeah,
I think for me, obviously, like Matthew said, it's also a lot of like my parents and my siblings and just like the I guess just the people I grew up around that have influenced my values. But also now in more recent years, I feel like um, social media has also influenced a lot of my values and probably the values of a lot of the people around me, just because of how accessible it is and the ability for someone to share their opinions and their thoughts and ideas so easily, and just basically the vast like amount of information just like the vast amount of information that's available out there, you know, and I feel like to a certain extent it's very helpful for society and for people growing up in this culture, but at the same time there are a lot of dangers that could come with so much information. Like sometimes it's too much and it's hard to fact check things online as well. So like what do you guys think about just like the media in general, or like how the media influences people?
I think it can really skew stories because, I mean, oftentimes media will push kind of a story or like a view that they want, even though, so by either like omitting details or just telling it in a certain way. So, like, you just really never sure on if you're getting the true story. And like you said, like, media can be extremely helpful because it's just a vast amount of information, and just like with the internet and social media, I mean, you have access to information all across the globe. So
yeah. And I mean, especially when it comes to like fake information and fake news, it's almost like a rabbit hole that you can go down through. I mean, once you read the first false article, you kind of have your own like opinions shaped around that event. And I feel like the more you read into it, the more you're gonna go into having a false deception or like a false perception of something. And it'll only get worse if you don't know like the right way to fact check or like verifying whether or not a piece of information is true. So yeah, as someone that's not in TOK, what are your thoughts on just like what we've been talking about in general and like your values in social media?
Um, I mean, I feel like the way I act and the way I talk to people and like the subjects I do talk to people about, I think I get a lot of that from social media. Like I see a lot of sports on my social media, like
platforms all the time. So I'm constantly talking about sports, even thinking about it like right now. I think I talk about sports way too much to some people. I get a lot of sports, but I don't I don't really like see like politics as much on my pages, so I don't that is the part where I don't know that type of stuff, but I guess that's where I can kind of see my values as like a person. Like I mainly just am focusing on like the stuff that doesn't really matter, like sports and like arts and other things like that, instead of like politics and like the world changing.
Good points, good ideas.
Um, so I think that's most of what we wanted to cover today. Um, is there any last thoughts regarding TOK as a class or how TOK has influenced your lives?
I think we've just about covered it all.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for watching this episode of the podcast, and we will see you next time.